Hello and welcome to the MyHeritage webinar series. I'm Jeff Rasmussen, your host, live at webinar headquarters in Middleton, Idaho. Today we have Ran Sneer, who is with us live at MyHeritage headquarters in Or Yehuda, Israel, for his class Visualizing Ancestral Lines with DNA AutoClusters. So thanks to Ran and thanks to all of you for registering for today's live webinar. So glad to have you with us. And I hope this is now on your calendars for this September. If you've ever wanted to visit Amsterdam, here's your chance to do that and to take part in a genealogy conference at the same time. The second annual MyHeritage Live will be held September 6th through the 8th. So more information or to register is available at live2019.myheritage.com, and I hope to see you all there. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Ran Sneer. As product manager, Ran is responsible for MyHeritage DNA products. He leads a talented team of developers, QA engineers, and designers to create and optimize DNA users' entire experience, from ordering a DNA kit, tracking the kit's progress, receiving results, to leveraging a continually growing suite of features to make the most of the DNA results in genealogical research. He led the development of the chromosome browser for shared DNA segments feature, and most recently the development of the brand new theory of family relativity, and now the new AutoClusters feature. So please put together your virtual hands and let's give Ran Sneer a nice warm webinar welcome. Ran, how are you? And welcome to the show.
Hi, Jeff. I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
Seems like we were just here together about a month ago, and I think we were, and what a fun webinar that was. But I've got a good feeling here about AutoClusters, and we're really excited about this topic. So thanks for being here, Ran, and the time's all yours.
Thanks, Jeff. All right. So let me take this down. All right, so hi everybody. As Jeff introduced, my name is Ran Sneer, product manager for DNA at MyHeritage, and I'm so happy to be here today to talk about the new AutoClusters feature that we recently launched. It was during RootsTech in February, end of February of this year. And since we've launched, we've seen so many people take the opportunity and generating their AutoClusters reports. And while we see the great excitement and the positive vibe that that's there around this feature, we also see a lot of questions and a lot of people that some even don't know how to start looking at it or how to interpret the results. And hopefully this will be a good opportunity to answer some of these questions and explain a little bit more about what are AutoClusters, how it's done, and what you can take from it, what's in it for you. So I think we're ready to start. And there's no better way to start this webinar but by explaining what are AutoClusters. So AutoClusters is a method, is a tool in the box that we have, in the box of tools that we have, that helps you organize your DNA matches into shared clusters, match clusters, that likely descended from common ancestors. Pretty much what that means is that this is a new approach that we really wanted to introduce. If up till today we were used to work with our DNA matches one by one, look at them, check the genealogical information that we had for each one of them separately, the AutoClusters tries things in a different way, and it tries to group matches together by certain similar characteristics, which we'll go over in a couple of minutes, that can help a lot when doing the research and trying to really understand how the DNA matches are related to us. Who is that common ancestor, or what line of the family this person is related to me from. All right, and let's start with an example. So I took a screen capture of, I created this page showing my matches, and in this page I just listed them and I changed their names from A to J. So I have matches A, B, C, D, etc. And this is my starting point. So we're taking our DNA matches and we're looking at them one by one. So let's zoom in, and we see that I have 3 DNA matches here, A, B, and C. And I'm starting by going to the review match page with my DNA match named A in this case. When you'll go to the review DNA match page, and I've spoken about it in previous webinars, there's a lot of information here that you can use to understand how this specific person is related to you. But for AutoClusters, we're going to focus solely on the shared DNA matches. Shared DNA matches, as a quick reminder, are DNA matches who I have, who are matching me, and also matching the person who I'm currently looking at. So in my example, I started with my match named A, and I can see that in the list of shared DNA matches, I have a person B, C, and D. So what that tells us is that, to summarize it kind of, B, C, and D, those folks are my DNA matches, but they're also A's DNA matches. So they appear on both sides, and as you can see here in the chart, we're telling you the relationship estimate to you and the relationship estimate to the person you're currently looking at. So B is A's second to fifth cousin, while B is my first cousin to first cousin once removed. But we know that there's a certain connection that binds me, A, and B together. Let's go back to the DNA matches list and now look at the review DNA match page of my match with person B. And when I go there, not to my surprise, I can see A, C, and D. The reason I wanted to emphasize this, that I'm going back and forth and checking for each DNA match separately who are our shared DNA matches, is because it can very much be that while I match a person A and B, C and D, and A is also matching all of them, B might not necessarily be sharing any DNA with C, for example. So that's why we need to check each one to make sure that they're all connected to one another. I'm scrolling a little bit down the list, and now I'm looking at my matches E, F, and G. I'm starting with E, and looking at his shared DNA matches, what I can see here is that I can see F and G. So in this case, I am matching E, but both me and E are matching F and G. What I don't see here is that I don't see the people A, B, C, and D, which I saw before. So what that kind of hints us at this point is that A, B, C, and D are probably related to me from one side of the family, while E, F, and G are probably related from another one. But again, we need to check each one separately, so I'm checking also match F, and I can see in the shared DNA matches that E and G appear here as well. That was kind of tricky, but I think that next slide will be able to simplify things. So if I'm looking at myself and I'm looking at my DNA matches, I can say now that there's one group of matches who I can put together. I can combine them for a second and say they're all matching one another. And there's something similar in the DNA that all of us have, and I can for now put them in one group. And I can say A, B, C, and D are group A. And there's a second group that includes E, F, and G. Now the people in the second group are not matching the people in the first group, and vice versa, obviously, but they're all matching me. So these are all my DNA matches, and by looking at the shared DNA matches that I have with each one of them, I was able to kind of split them, kind of create 2 different groups for myself and say, okay, these are related from one side and these are related from the other. For the example, let's say A, B, C, and D could be related to me from my father's side, Raphael, on the left, and E, F, and G are related to me from my mother's side, from my maternal side, on the right. And that is what AutoClusters is actually doing. So we now went manually, and we went match by match and looked at each one of the matches and the shared DNA matches. And obviously, I decided for the purpose of this example to take a very small subset of DNA matches of about 7 or so, and then going one by one. And it was very luckily that for each one of them, I had only 2 shared DNA matches or something like that. But when we're looking in the broader scale in real life, we've got thousands of matches, most of us, and for each one of them, we have hundreds of shared DNA matches between us, and manually this become an almost impossible work to be done. So again, what we're actually doing here is that we're looking at the DNA matches list, and then for each one of your DNA matches, we're checking the shared DNA matches, and our algorithm kicks in and tries to build this this picture, this set of different groups of your DNA matches, who they're all matching you, but they're not all matching each other. So we're breaking them into groups by how they all share one another. And that's actually what comes out as the AutoClusters. These are the AutoClusters. There's a group of DNA matches who are all or most of them, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes, are matching one another, and therefore there's a good probability that all the people in the cluster are related to you from a specific ancestral line or a branch of your family tree. So how to generate the AutoClusters report? It's a pretty easy process. When you'll go to your DNA results on MyHeritage, you'll see that we've added recently a new tools option, the fourth option next to DNA matches. And once you'll click on that, you'll get to see the three tools that we currently have on the website, the chromosome browser, which we've launched about a year ago, as Jeff mentioned earlier, and the new AutoClusters right there in the middle. So you hit the Explore button, and you will get to a page that gives you general information of what AutoClusters are, kind of what I've just described. There's a nice image, or actually kind of a video that shows how AutoClusters are built and what you should expect to get. And the option to choose for who you want to generate the AutoClusters right here. I'm about to generate it for myself. And the option to hit Generate. As you can see right here at the bottom, we have mentioning here to Evert Jan Blom. Evert is a EJ. He's a Dutch guy. He's running a website called Genetic Affairs, and he actually came up with this method towards the end of 2018. And we looked at that, and we saw what a great potential this capability has, and we reached out to EJ, and we've worked together to bring this capability to life on MyHeritage so that our users will be able to generate their AutoClusters right on MyHeritage. So it was a lot of fun working with him and bringing this to life. All right, so once you hit the Generate button, you will get a notice saying that an email will soon be sent to you with your AutoClusters report. At the moment, we're giving our users the option to get it offline, to get it over email so that they can work with that, also when not on MyHeritage. And the email will be sent to you either within minutes or within a couple of hours. When we launched, the excitement was so big so that some users have even mentioned that it took them a day or so to get the file. But once everything stabilized, it should be taken in between a couple of minutes to a couple of hours, and your report will be ready. So what actually happens when you hit that Generate button is that we're now going over your DNA matches, and for each DNA match, we're going over the shared DNA matches, and the algorithm takes all that data in and tries to build that picture, tries to break the list of DNA matches that you have into the clusters, into the groups of DNA matches that are probably related to you from various family lines. So to the email, there will be an attachment. It's a zip file. And once you open the zip file, you'll have three files inside, a CSV, an HTML, and a README PDF. Today, we're going to talk mostly about the HTML file, which has all the goodies inside. The CSV is more of kind of the raw data that was used to generate the AutoClusters. And in the README PDF, you can read a little bit about what are the AutoClusters, which matches didn't make it into the AutoCluster final report and why, and some additional useful information. But as I mentioned, I would like to focus more today on the actual AutoCluster report, which is inside the HTML file. So when you double click on the HTML file, open the file, your browser will open the AutoCluster report for you, which looks something like that. Don't worry, we'll zoom in a second. We'll go over each part of it. And let's start with the header, with the top. So this is how an AutoCluster report looks like when you open it. It's not very fun. It's not very intuitive. Very hard to say who is related to who. But the cool thing about it is that within a second or so, the animation will kick in, and you will see your DNA matches align automatically to build the AutoClusters, to kind of show you how they are related to one another. And each color here, each cluster is represented by a different color, consists of a different group of DNA matches that you have, that we were able, based on the shared DNA matches information, group together. Let's go step by step and explain what you see here. Let's start with the right side. So the right side is kind of a summary, what your AutoCluster report has. What we were able to generate. So in the example I'm using here, we were able to generate 17 different clusters. In the first one, we can see that we have 15 members. These are actually 15 of your DNA matches. Cluster number 2 has 13 of your DNA matches, and so on and so forth, up until cluster 17. There is no specific, we cannot say what ancestral line each cluster is coming from. This will be left to you to look at your DNA matches and kind of fill in the gaps and add all the information that you have already been able to gather to say that cluster 1 is probably related to you from this side of the family and cluster number 2 from another side. There are some hints inside, and we'll deep dive into that. If you hover over each one of these, you will get the list of the names of the DNA matches that made it into your to this specific cluster. So in cluster number 1, I have 15 members, and these are their names. Now let's go back for a second and look at the top section of the page. So under the AutoClusters title, you can see who this report was generated for. On MyHeritage, we allow the option to manage DNA kits for more than one person. So in this case, I generated this AutoCluster for a person named John Smith. His kit number is MH123456, and I have generated the AutoCluster report today. Keep in mind, as time goes by and more DNA matches are added to your DNA matches list, your AutoCluster report is going to change. So I highly recommend that you keep a folder, and every now and then when you generate your AutoCluster report, you can compare it and see who are the DNA matches who made it in. Some might have went out. So you can keep track of your AutoClusters reports. So as we showed in the animation before, when the page loads, it's kind of a big mess of DNA matches all around, all over. But after a second, it auto-sorts itself to show you the DNA matches by cluster. That is the default. So cluster number 1, the red one here, is at the top. Cluster number 2, the orange, is the next one, and so on and so forth. But there are other ways to order your DNA matches in this chart. And these are by name, the number of shared matches, how many of the matches that you have in your report that person is also sharing DNA with, and the amount of centimorgans that the DNA match has with you, with the tester, in this case John Smith. So you can also sort it to show the people who are more closer to you appearing first, and descending to the ones who you're sharing less DNA with. Looking at the X and Y axis, so it's actually the same DNA matches. As you can see, the list starts with Kaya, Reed, Macy, Garza, Hilda, Shirley, etc. But you can see that these are the same people that appear both on the vertical axis and on the horizontal axis. And that's why there's a little more color dot, the darker red, on the diagonal line, because these are the intersection of the same people with themselves. I'll explain in a second what I mean by that. So what are these colored cells and how to read this? So let's look, for example, at the intersection between Greg Hicks and Wilson Brook. So you can see that these folks, they match right here. This is their intersection point, and you can see that there's a color dot. Every time that you have a color dot, it means that a shared DNA match exists. If I'll go and open my review DNA match page with Wilson Brook, I will see Greg Hicks appearing as a shared DNA match for both Wilson and me. So these are what the color dots represent. When you hover over it, you'll be able to see again, so that it's easier to interact with. At the top, you'll see the names, what intersection you're currently on. So this is Wilson and Greg, and the names of the other people in the cluster. But sometimes the cell is not grayed, like in the example with Hilda and Macy. So the reason that this sometimes happens and that you don't see a very nice full colored square is because not all these people are shared DNA matches to one another. That would have been a little bit too greedy to ask from the algorithm, and we would have been left with very small or kind of useless clusters. So what we see here, if I'll open my review DNA match with Hilda, I won't find Macy there, because I'm matching Macy and I'm matching Hilda. Obviously, they're in my report right here, and they're from my DNA matches list. But Macy and Hilda are not matching one another. But that is fine. We have still decided to keep them here and to group them together under cluster 1. And the reason is that we're using different thresholds or implementing different rules, so that even if the person doesn't match all of the people in the cluster, like in this example right here, we would still put them in if they're matching most of them. And as you can see, Hilda is matching about 8 other people in the cluster, but she's not matching the other 4 or so. There are great examples, like the example of Allison E. James. Maybe you can see my cursor. She's right here. And she's really matching, as you can see the line, all of the people in cluster number 1. There's a shared DNA match between me and Allison and all of the other people here. But other people sometimes match a little less and sometimes match half of those. And the algorithm has still decided there's a sufficient amount of DNA matches who are shared between me and them to group them together under cluster number 1. So this is why sometimes you see a dotted colored cell, and sometimes the cell is kind of empty. When you review your report, you will notice something else. So we've talked about the colored cells, and we've talked about the non-colored cells. But there are some gray cells that appear every now and then. So in this example right here, there's a gray cell between Mandy and Rihanna. I think that's the name over there. So what does that mean? It means that there is a shared DNA match between me or John in this example, Rihanna and Mandy. But the problem is that Rihanna is in cluster number 2. And Mandy is in cluster number 4. Number 2 is the orange cluster. Number 4 is the green cluster. But there's also a shared DNA match. So we have found this, but we just couldn't say, does that mean that we need to take Mandy out of cluster number 4 and put it in cluster number 2? Or alternatively, take Rihanna out of cluster number 2 and put her in cluster number 4. So as you can, as the gray dots grow, as there are more and more gray dots that you see in your report, like in this example right here, you can see that there are a lot of gray dots. I just zoomed out a bit. It's still the same report. You can see that there are a lot of people that there's a shared DNA match between various people in this group, and a lot of them could have been, some of them appear, they were allocated to cluster number 2, and some of them were allocated to cluster, I can follow the numbers, the purple cluster. So that sometimes can be an indication. Once we have too many of these, too many people that could have been both in 2 clusters, that's a good hint for us that we should actually bind those clusters together. There are probably people related to me from the same ancestral line. So the algorithm is trying to find the good balance between breaking down matches into various clusters. And in many cases, you will see things like that in which the algorithm decided, okay, so this is kind of the optimal way. because the purple cluster, for example, you can see all these people are matching one another. It's a perfect cluster, right, of where all these 4 individuals are all matching one another, like in the first example that we started the presentation with. And if we would have merged it together with the orange cluster, it wouldn't have been that perfect. Maybe it's not even right to do so. So the cluster is automatically trying to decide whether to group clusters together or break them down into 2. And in this example, it broke them down into 2. What's worth checking here is whether the people that are in the orange cluster, Barnaby, Karen, Rihanna, Isaac, etc., and the people in the purple cluster right here, who are Layla and Sidra and Fletcher, maybe they are all they are actually related to me from the same ancestral line. So that's worth checking. And those gray dots help us draw our attention to this. All right, we're scrolling further down to the bottom of the chart. And here we can see some information about certain variables that were used, certain thresholds that were used to generate the AutoCluster report. So let's go over one by one. The total number of DNA matches, I hope, is kind of intuitive, but these are how many matches were included in the AutoCluster report, in this specific AutoCluster report. So we can see that there were 87 in this case. Sometimes there'll be more, sometimes there'll be a little less, but we're trying to keep it to 100, as this is also kind of the optimal way to work with this chart. Above 100, it gets a little bit tricky. We're telling you what is the minimal threshold of centimorgans that was used to generate this AutoCluster report. Now, this threshold is between you and your DNA matches. When you get a DNA match, like in this example right here, you can see that me and person A have 103.3 centimorgans in common. So if for this report we have used a minimal threshold of 30 centimorgans and the maximal threshold, which appears right next to it, of 350 centimorgans, it means that A was pulled in to join the AutoCluster calculation. The reason that we're using these thresholds, I'll explain in the next slide, I believe, but it varies. Not necessarily every report you'll run will be using the same minimal threshold. The max threshold is almost always 350, and I'll explain soon why that happens. But the minimal threshold can change. There are people coming from various different origins. For example, I'm about 97% Jewish Ashkenazi, and that is a very, we're known for our endogamous, for being an endogamy population. There are a lot of intermarriages that happened in the Jewish Ashkenazi communities in past generations, and that obviously kind of it becomes kind of a problem when we're trying to work with our DNA matches. Because if I'm looking at a person and I'm trying to understand by the amount of centimorgans, what is my relationship to him? If we are related through more than one ancestor, so it also kind of the relationship estimate and the amount of centimorgans could be a little bit misleading because it wasn't necessarily inherited from one ancestor, but from a couple of them. So this is why we're playing with the minimal and the maximal thresholds. The idea here is that what we're doing when we're generating the AutoCluster report is that we're running it many times. We're trying again and again and again, each time with different combinations of these centimorgans to see what is the optimal outcome that we can take. For some people, taking a threshold of 30 centimorgans will work, and you can end up with the report that I'm showing here. But in some cases, you will just get one big cluster because almost all of your too many DNA matches with 40 centimorgans were pulled in, and they're all matching one another. So we're playing with this variable automatically when the AutoCluster report is being generated. So that's the max threshold as I described. And we're also using a threshold for the shared DNA matches. So all these, the minimal and maximal thresholds that I've spoken about before are related to you and your DNA matches. The shared DNA matches mean threshold is for the shared DNA matches. So to make sure that also person B and person C are matching and they share more than 10 centimorgan. And again, this variable auto adjusts as we play along. And why are we using these thresholds? And that's a frequently asked question. I see it all the time on social media. I've generated my AutoCluster report, but I can't find my first cousin there. So why? Why is he not there? Obviously, he's very close to me. And also, if I have him in a cluster, that will be very easy for me to say how the other people in the cluster are related to me, because I know how I'm related to my first cousin. So why do none of my close relatives with whom I share DNA appear in the cluster? And that's exactly the reason why the thresholds that we use, the max and the min, and I'll explain why. So again, every cluster ideally holds DNA matches who are related to you from different ancestor lines. So the red could be related for you from one ancestor, the orange from ancestor B, yellow from ancestor C, green from D, etc. We were able to break it down and tell you these are people that are sharing DNA matches only within themselves and not with the other people in the report, so they are probably related to you from one specific ancestor. And I'll use the example of my family tree to explain this, and we'll look at what can happen if we're not using thresholds at all. So this is me right here. These are my father and mother. And this is my paternal grandmother. So all of the four of us have taken a DNA test. So my father, mother, and grandma appear as DNA matches on my list. Now let's zoom in for a second and talk about this situation with me and my dad and my grandparents from his side. So let's say for now, kind of go back to our first example that we spoke about. Let's say that A, B, C, and D, which I was able to group together because they're all sharing DNA with one another, they're all related to me through my paternal grandfather, all right, Abraham. And E, F, G, who also had this little group for themselves, are related to me from my grandmother, Raya, right here. So if the situation was as it is today, and I set the threshold to not take parents, okay, I'm taking only DNA matches with centimorgan, with amount of shared DNA centimorgans who is lower than the amount that you should be sharing with a father, I was probably able to create that these two clusters, right? I was able to break them into A, B, C, and D on the one side, and E, F, and G on the other side. But if I didn't use threshold and I also took my father in, now I have a different problem, because all of these people who are related to me from my grandparents are probably also related to my father, and they're all matching my father. And the problem here is that my father here, if I'll take him in when I'm trying to create the AutoCluster report, there's a little problem that's introduced here, that he's kind of getting in the way of breaking A, B, C, and D, and E, F, and G, because he's sharing DNA with all of them. So this is why we're setting the maximum threshold, so that my father our close relatives will not group together clusters if not necessary, right? If I can tell you, hey, here are 4 people related to you from one side, and here are 3 people related to you from another side, that's way more valuable than telling you, hey, here are 7 people all related to you from your father's side. So this is the tricky part, and why the threshold needs to be very carefully chosen, and this is why the algorithm is doing. I put some examples here. When we were working on the implementation of AutoClusters, we were trying different thresholds. Here is an example when we didn't use thresholds at all, running on my own report. So again, because I'm Jewish Ashkenazi, and my father and mother and my close family was pulled in, my brothers, for example, all the matches that I have, or at least most of them, are also matching my brothers. So when I took my brother in, now my brother is kind of ruining the breakdown of AutoClusters, because all of the people I match with are also all matching with him, and this what ended up in one huge cluster. When we started introducing thresholds and setting the max a little bit lower, so we start getting into things like that. So you can see here one huge red cluster and a lot of gray dots, these gray, which kind of we internally interpreted as it's noise, because you can see that there are so many people who could have been made it into the red cluster and to the orange cluster and to the yellow cluster, pretty much all of these clusters, because they're all matching one another. And this is why we had to set thresholds in a way so that it's easier to work with, and you'll get a cleaner report that shows you how different DNA matches are related to you through various ancestors. So back to our problem, and why do none of my close relatives? So what people are usually end up with is a list of clusters, right? Sometimes 7, 10, or 15 clusters, but they can't say how they are related to none of the people that are involved, that are in the clusters. They can't see their close relatives. And my best recommendation, and I chose this example. So here is, for example, the red cluster, the first cluster, and I have about 13 members in it. I can take the first person here, Kaya, and I can just go and look at the review match page that I have with Kaya. And when I do that, the first person that appears here is my mom. So that's a very good indication for me that I'm related to Kaya through my mom's side. Now I don't need to go over thousands of shared DNA matches. Below my mom is my daughter, which doesn't add a lot of, it's just always nice to put a picture of my daughter, but it doesn't add a lot of information here. But what I can say here is that Kaya is related to me from my maternal side. So I can check the other people in the red cluster. If I see my mom comes back again and again, or a first cousin or a second cousin, or people that we've tested or we were able to identify, even if they're further away, if they're third cousins or fourth cousins, and we were able to make that path, we were able to understand what side of the family we're related to. If we see these people coming back again and again, when we're coming to the review match page, that's a good hint for us, and we can add a note stating exactly that, so that this person in cluster number 1 is also matching my first cousin Yuval, for example, and the others as well. And I can say, okay, so the red cluster are people who are matching me through the common ancestor I share with Yuval, through my first cousin. And this is what I recommend of doing. So we're taking them out when we're auto-calculating the report, but when reviewing the clusters, it's great to look at them and look for those relatives who you were already able to identify and spot the connection, and then go back to the clusters or to the DNA matches and add the notes and continue the research from there. Okay, so we spoke about the various thresholds, and below the chart, there's also a table which some people sometimes miss. They look at the chart and they don't scroll down, but please do, because in the table below there's a lot of useful information and kind of quick links that can help you work with your DNA matches, with your clusters. Let's zoom in, for example, at the top. So the table consists of various fields. These are the same people that you saw above in a visual way. Now they're presented in a table format so that you can work with that as well. So you can see the name of the person. Each name here is also a hyperlink. You can click on this link and it will take you directly to the review DNA match page with that person. This is extremely handy, as I explained just a minute ago. So if you're looking at cluster number 1 and you weren't able to figure out how these people are related, Kaya and Macy and Hilda, you can go to the review match page with each one of them, look at the shared DNA matches, and look for those relatives, for the DNA matches that you were able to identify the connection with. You can see how much centimorgans you have with each one of them, what is the largest segment, how many segments you share with each one of them, how many people, how many shared DNA matches you and them have in this chart, what is the cluster you're currently looking at. The next one is one I like the most, is whether these people have trees on MyHeritage, and the number indicates the number of individuals that they have in those trees. So for example, Macy here, which I put a little square around, has a tree with 22 individuals on MyHeritage. So you can also click this 22 number or whatever the number is, and it will automatically take you to view the tree of the DNA match on MyHeritage. So you can look for the different genealogical data points, such as surnames and places, that maybe you have in common with that person or with the other people in the cluster. What I like to do the most is go over all of the people I have in a certain cluster and try to see what kind of information repeats itself. What do they all have in common? So maybe out of this 15 people in cluster 1, I can see that 8 of them have ancestral events in Russia. So I can kind of know which direction this might be coming from. Or I can see a surname that repeats itself again and again. So this is very useful, and I highly recommend that you use it. The last one here on the list is the notes. If you've added on MyHeritage a note to your DNA match, it will appear here. This becomes very useful when working with the AutoClusters. So add notes as you go by. If there are some things that you are able to figure out, or there are some things that you've learned, please list them in a note. And once we're generating the AutoClusters, you'll be able to see those notes, and it will save you a lot of time going over the results. Some tips on how to use the table. So in this example right here, I set the minimal centimorgan to 100. Remember before in the slide where I showed how you can order the chart in a different way, there was also an option to sort it or to order the matches in the chart by the closest, the ones who you share more DNA with first, and then the list is sorted descendingly to the ones you share less with. So this is kind of the same trick. So if I'm opening my AutoCluster report and I can't recognize the names, or I haven't started looking at the review match page looking for known family members, I can start with the ones who are closer to me. So I can put here 100 centimorgan, for example, and I'm left here with just about 7 people. And that's great. So I can look at the person who I share more DNA with, who is probably closer to me than the others, and that might be a good place to start. I can see in cluster 1, for example, I have 4 people with whom I share more than 100 centimorgans. The same thing goes to the largest segment. And here I put 50, and I'm left with 6 different individuals with whom I have a 50 centimorgan long segment or more. And that's a very good indication that this is a big segment, a big chunk of DNA that both me and these people have inherited. Not necessarily the same segment with each one of them. It could very much be a different segment. But these are people who I share a decent segment with and are more worth looking at than the other ones. So I'm kind of playing with the table, playing with the AutoCluster report and trying to prioritize where to start first. I think this is also kind of the motive that keeps coming again and again, how to work with the list of DNA matches and how to work with your DNA results in general. How should I start? How to prioritize the work? So sometimes we use genealogical data. I want to look at only people who have trees. I want to look at people who I have a shared surname with. I have a smart match on MyHeritage, for example. I spoke about these things in previous webinars. So in this case, I'm trying to use the same method. So I'm trying to look first at the DNA matches who are closer to me. Hopefully, I'll be able to figure out how we're related, and that might shed light on how I'm related to the other people in the same cluster. So if I can figure out, for example, how I'm related to Effie Booth, that's a great start for understanding how I'm related to Aidin, Ethan, and the other people in cluster number 1. So kind of to summarize, the AutoClusters help you explore your DNA matches more efficiently in groups rather than as individuals. I think this is if I had to summarize it into one sentence, this is what I like the most about it. Up till now, we looked at matches in the context of 1-to-1, in the shared DNA matches on 1-to-2. In our chromosome browser, we were able to try and triangulate up to 7 individuals, but that was all very manual and going one by one. The AutoClusters feature is the first one of its kind that is trying to look at the DNA matches list as a whole, or as at least of the subset of the closest, the closest hundreds of DNA matches that you have, and is trying to break them down into groups. And now you're not only using the information that you have from one individual, you have 10 or 15 individuals together in one cluster, and you can try and look at that information as like kind of in an aggregative way, so that maybe you can take one piece of information from the first person in the cluster and then the second one from the second, etc., and build a nice picture that can explain how you and your DNA matches are related and who are the common ancestors between you and these individuals. AutoClusters are based purely on DNA results. We're not looking at all at family trees. You will see that there are people without family trees that are making it into the AutoCluster report just because they are shared DNA with you and they are sharing DNA with the other folks in the same cluster. So none of family trees or records is being used for that, unlike in the theory of family relativity feature that I spoke about in the previous webinar. Last tip that I would give you is to use the table in the AutoClusters report and make sure that you visit the review match pages for each of your DNA matches. As there are so many more hints, there you will be able to see your known relatives and connect the dots, and there's a world of endless genealogical information awaits that can explain and shed more light on how you are related to these DNA matches and how the picture is being built when grouping matches into clusters. I will end by stating again, as Jeff mentioned, that this year we're having our second user conference in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, between the 6th and the 8th of September. We had our first one last year in Oslo, Norway, which was great. You folks over there talk more about genealogy and genetic genealogy, and by September is like still so far out. I'm sure we'll have so many more cool features that we can discuss. So thank you very much. And Jeff, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Okay, thanks, Rand. The comments are wonderful. It's so fun to read how people are commenting here. And we have some really good questions, too. So, Rand, I'm going to switch over. Let's do a couple door prizes, and then we'll get right to people's questions here. But very well done. And
Thank you very much.
my favorite part of the AutoClusters is the animation and just watching them all come together. That's fun.
People love it.
Yeah,
I know.
if you haven't seen it out there, go and do your first AutoCluster today, and you'll know exactly what I mean. Well, our next live webinar is coming up on the 23rd of April. Mike Mansfield will teach us about census records, so don't miss that one. And door prize time. So I've got a 1-year MyHeritage complete plan, which this reminds me of one of the common questions here. To use AutoClusters, what form of membership at MyHeritage do we need to have?
Yeah, so the AutoClusters feature is a paid one. It requires what we call a site subscription for MyHeritage DNA kits. So it's either a Premium Plus, and for sure the complete one that you're showing now on the screen will get you that. For uploaded kits, if you've taken a test with another vendor or uploaded, there's an option to get the feature, to access the feature kit by kit. Unlike with a subscription, which opens the feature for all the kits that you manage, kit by kit for a one-time fee of $29.
Okay. Very good to know. And but if we've already got the MyHeritage complete plan, then that gives me access to everything, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
As the name states.
Okay, and this I think is 9.6 billion records now. I should update my slide here. Anyways, 1 year MyHeritage complete plan. This will get you the family site subscription and the access to all of the records up there as well. And if you're here, you're eligible to win. You just need to be here. And I'm going to find our first winner. We have Susan Gingras. Oh, that pen ran out of ink. Just a second. Use my pencil. Susan Gingras. All right. So congratulations to Susan. And let's go over to MyHeritage DNA test kit now. Who wants one of these? Let's go and find right here. I've got you. Just going to write your name down. Jonah Helstein. Jonah, congratulations. See, you never know what's going to happen at a live webinar, so glad that you're here. And let's go to questions now. So Ran, Susan's very happy. I could see in her response here to me in my chat area. So yeah, you're welcome, Susan. So we've got a few questions that are most commonly asked then. And I think you mentioned briefly about this first one, but let's talk about it one more time. From Pat, how often should we be regenerating our AutoCluster report?
That's a good question. I'm running myself every couple of weeks. It really depends on how many new matches you get per week. If you'll do it today and tomorrow, probably not a lot's going to change. So I'm trying every 2 weeks or so, every 3 weeks or so. One more thing to keep in mind is that, you know, I'm trying sometimes that one match that will enter the AutoCluster report will be able, you know, he will be the guy that's helping you break through that brick wall. I would recommend 2 to 3 weeks, but it's very subjective and very individual. So
Okay.
Everyone has different preferences.
Okay, thanks. Another question that's commonly asked here is about the threshold, and wondering if the consumer, this is from Maria, she says, can we change that amount of Sender Morgans to the minimum and maximum thresholds?
So currently, no. The answer is no. What we've implemented, and I know that on Genetic Affairs on AJ's website, there's an option to play with the min and max. We're thinking about for the next phase. Currently, what we've implemented, what we tried doing, also taking into consideration that a lot of our users would not really know how to play with these. That's why we've implemented this automatic adjustments of the threshold so that we can come up with the best optimal result. So currently, we're giving you that. We're setting the thresholds. We're thinking about maybe changing that for phase 2.
Okay.
For when we make some adjustments.
Well, from the comments here on my end, that would be very welcome. That people are excited about that. Bobby is saying, so AutoClusters work if you've imported a kit from another vendor? That's accurate, correct?
That is correct. On MyHeritage, there are 2 options to join our journey, or to have your DNA journey with us. One of them is to buy a MyHeritage DNA kit, like the one that was just given away. Or alternatively, if you have taken a test with another vendor, with another company who sells DNA kits, you can take your raw DNA data and upload it to MyHeritage. The upload is for free. You will get your list of DNA matches. There are some features that will cost additional payments, such as this one, but you're getting your list of DNA matches like any other user. This is one database. Everyone's matching or comparing everyone to everyone, those who have taken a test and those who have uploaded their kit from another vendor. So yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering, should I bring this over to my other monitor or not? I'm going to do it here, just to show those that haven't seen it. So when you open it, watch the animation of this part of my screen. I'm going to just hit refresh. Yep, that's what we're talking about. That's fun to watch. I love it. So Ran, I have a personal question here. And I don't know, maybe this is beyond the scope of this or not. So here in my tree at MyHeritage, I've got an ancestor here, John McCall, and you can see that he has no parents. Where does AutoClusters fit in to helping me identify who these people might be? And you could say, no, Jeff, let's talk about that another time too.
No, let's talk about it tonight.
Okay.
Sorry, it's your morning time, right? No, we can talk about it now for sure.
Okay.
So, can you go back for a second to the AutoCluster report, to
Yep.
your second tab before we jump into John McCall?
Yeah.
So, what you see here, we were able to generate 13 clusters for you. These are your personal results, right?
Yes, they are.
All right, so we were able to generate 13 different clusters, and we're distinguishing between them, as I explained, by the colors and the labels, and we're numbering them. So there's a very likely chance that if we're talking about 13 lines of ancestors, 13 different ancestors, one of them could have been coming from your ancestor, John, I'm sorry, was the name?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So, but we don't know that, right? We can't say. We're just looking at DNA matches and shared DNA matches, and that's pretty much it. If you have if you have already a DNA match who you know is related to you through the same ancestral line, so
Okay.
probably John John's DNA is both in you and him, right? You've both inherited some segments from John, and you might find him here in the cluster. That's a great start.
Yeah.
But even if you haven't been able to do so, by checking some of these different clusters, you probably will find him in one or two or three of the clusters. You will see that, for example, that person that you know that is related to you to the same line with John appears with when you open the review match page of most of the DNA matches in the orange cluster or the green cluster.
Yeah.
So that's a great way to know that these other people are probably also related to you from the same side. So John could be, he won't necessarily be the common ancestor for all of you, but these people may hold more information, and together, by contacting them or going over the trees, checking the shared ancestral places, etc., you might be able to figure out who were his parents.
Okay.
So this
Yeah.
is super cool.
Good. Perfect. Thank you. Very good. Let's go over to Lynn, who asks, is there a way to change the cluster's colors?
You don't like them, Lynn?
Oh,
Really?
oh,
I'm joking.
Lynn
Uh,
says more. Is there a way to change them so that all my cluster colors are the same? So Lynn must be really manipulating them for.
I see. So the way we do it is that we keep the same color order. That's a feedback I can pass on to my graphical designer.
Hmm.
He's very fond of these. No, because generally it can get a little bit tricky because if you'll try and change them now to orange and next time you'll generate the clusters, they'll still come back in red. There are a lot of thoughts that we're putting currently into the colors and how to leverage that and how to make it more distinguished. So there might be some surprises coming next.
Ah, okay. See, Rand, that's why I love having you here. You always tease us about you must be working on things all the time, but you show them to us in our live webinar. So thank you. Um, fun. Okay. Robin and a few others are asking this. Is there a minimum number of centimorgans that really I shouldn't waste any of my time on when I'm researching the matches?
It's a great question. And the answer is that it depends, as always.
Okay.
So there are tons of articles about it online, and there are a lot of influencers or kind of industry leaders who have taken different approaches. It really depends of whether you're coming from an endogamous population roots, whether you have endogamous roots or not. Because, for example, for Jewish Ashkenazi, in my case, I usually ignore, if I don't have a 15 centimorgan long with a DNA match, I would probably leave it aside. Again, I'm not saying that I'll ignore it completely, but when going over the thousands of DNA matches, if I don't have a 15 centimorgan long segment, it could very much be random or so distant that I will never be able to figure it out. In other cases, people are using 7 or 9, kind of varies, but that's around the number that I'm familiar with. And as always, there's no right or wrong. I'm sure that there are success stories of people who were able to find known relatives, confirmed relatives, who don't have a segment which is longer than 7.
Okay.
That's the number I'm familiar with.
Okay. Thanks, Rand.
Sure.
Now, in the table view, I believe is where we were able to see the some numbers relating to
Mm,
trees. I've had a few questions about that number. If a person's tree is private, is there going to be a number that shows up there if the tree is private?
I think we will show the number, but once you'll click on that, it will tell you that this site is private, and whether it
Okay.
depends on what the user decided to put, you can either request membership or contact the site manager to get more information into that, but we will display the number.
Okay, makes sense. And then Robin wonders, if you click there and you want to see the tree, if that's available, does that require you to have some level of a membership to be able to see the trees and additional information?
So if you were able to generate the auto cluster, that probably means that you have already paid the necessary fee
Huh.
to also view the trees. It's kind of it comes together with the subscription, so
Okay.
there won't be an additional charge for that.
Okay. Good. Charles is wondering, can auto clusters be useful for finding the birth parents of adoptees? Have you heard of situations
I
like
would
that yet?
I would definitely say that yes. And I think it was in one of the bullets that I summarized the presentation,
Okay.
is that we're not looking at all at any genealogical information. Like the,
Yeah.
we're not looking at names, we're not looking at places, we're strictly looking at DNA. So from the AutoCluster's perspective, we're looking at DNA matches and we're looking for shared DNA matches, so that it will be able to break down into different clusters, and some of them will be from the biological side that maybe is unknown to the adoptees. Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. You're doing well. I'm throwing questions at you really quickly here, but so thank you, Ren. David is wondering, once we've determined the relationship through auto clusters or otherwise, are we then able to mark each person with that relationship that we've determined? Can we add a note or can we add
So the way
something?
the way I do that is that, and I don't think I have it on my slides today, is that once I was able to figure out how I'm related to one of my DNA matches,
Yeah.
I'm going back to my family tree on MyHeritage, and I've spoken with him and interacted. I'm inviting him to my site, and once he's invited, we're no longer showing you the estimated relationship and things like that. We're just telling you this person exists in your family tree. Your family tree, he's your second cousin, once removed, for example. So that kinds of highlights him as a known relative. Um,
Okay.
so this is how I personally do that.
And is there a way, can you add a note to a match?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, actually, good point. Very good point. When you know how you're related to someone, in many cases the name will, kind of uh, say it by itself. But if you know how you're related to a person, you can just click on that note icon at the top right corner and add whatever information you want, and that will also appear in the table once generating AutoCluster.
All right, so I could say this is my father, and then this
Correct.
turns a color to tell me that there's something there.
That you've
And
already added the note, correct. And you
yeah,
can click on it and edit and change as you go.
okay. All right, good, thank you. And I'm looking at my son here. We had lots of people writing in about your daughter and saying thanks for sharing. She's beautiful, and that reminded me. Have
Thank you
I
very
have
much.
I tested the DNA of the rest of my kids? I think I've only done it with one of them, and thinking, oh, I ought to do that with my daughter also. I think that'd be fun. Well, okay.
I think I told you that joke in the past. She was, I think, 2 years old when when I took her test. It was a very tough negotiation. It was taking a cheek swab, and I had to pay about, I think it was 4 chocolate candies in return. So I hope you'll get a better deal.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Well, Elaine says we need to have a webinar in the future on dealing with endogamous populations. That's one that would be a really popular one but you did answer a lot of people's questions in here about endogamy. Leslie's wondering, how do I, now this is the topic you taught about last month, how do I access my theory of family relativity I know for me, for right now anyways, it shows this. If you have any people that have that, it'll show up here in pink. Is there another
Mhm.
way to see if you have any people with that?
Yes, we have also implemented the logic so that if you've some people, there's a little X button to close this, so we're not going to show it again to keep you. So we'll take it away next time that you log in. Alternatively, what you can do is click on the filters button right there. And from the first category of all three details, there's an option to show only the DNA matches with whom we were able to find a theory of family relativity.
Okay. So, Leslie, that's exactly how you do it. And for those who are asking, it's familytreewebinars.com/ransneer, and I've put that in your chat area. So this is where you can go and learn about theory of family relativity. Ran, I think, what was it, a year
The library is
ago?
growing. Wow.
Oh, yeah, people keep on
Mhm.
watching them, and we've had some really fun ones. Boy, was this one ever fun! Here I did with you. This one was
Oh
incredible.
yeah.
So just go back if you want to kind of get from the beginning of all of this. Go right here and then see if there's others in the library that are of interest. You could also go up here if you're new to DNA. Let me recommend this. If you're brand new to DNA, go to familytreewebinars.com/DNA, and then right down here is the Foundations course, and this was taught by Blaine Bettinger. Start with number one and watch one, two, three, four, and five. Then you'll have a really good understanding, so that everything else that we're talking about here in our webinar series makes even more sense. Well, Ran, it's been a fun time here with you today. It's late evening where you're at. There's some exciting happenings in Israel today, I think, and so I know you're anxious to go and see what the results from the elections are. So, any final thoughts, Ran, before we sign off and say goodbye?
It's been fun as always, and thanks for having me again, Jeff. You're doing a great job, and it's always fun to be here and talk about the various things that we do and add to the product and add to the website. And truly happy to see how people are utilizing the things that we've put on and hearing the feedback on social media and through these kind of channels. And there's a lot more coming.
Oh,
Stay tuned.
I love it. Okay. Thanks, Ran, and appreciate you, and you're welcome here anytime, as are the rest of you. Thanks, everyone, for sharing part of your day with us. And remember, life is short. Do genealogy first. Bye, everyone. Bye, Ran.
Bye bye. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye bye.